The dust of FOB Kestrel tasted like rust and regret. It swirled in lazy, heat-choked eddies, coating everything in a fine red powder. It coated the stacked HESCO barriers, the razor wire, and the bored, resentful faces of the Marines of 1st Platoon, Force Reconnaissance. They watched the Osprey descend, its rotors whipping the grit into a blinding storm. When the ramp lowered, it revealed a single figure, silhouetted against the glaring sky. The figure was small, unexpectedly so. As it walked down the ramp, the silhouette resolved into a woman. She wore standard-issue navy camo, but her frame was lean, almost slight, lost in the fabric. She carried a single rifle case and a discreet pack, moving with an unnerving economy of motion. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun. She didn't look around, didn't seem to register the dozen pairs of eyes dissecting her. Her focus was a straight line from the aircraft to the plywood shack designated as the command post. "You gotta be kidding me," a voice rumbled. It belonged to Sergeant Cole Davis, a man built like a blocking sled, with a neck as thick as a tree trunk and a jaw perpetually set in a sneer. His call sign was Wrecker, and he earned it. "That's our JSOC liaison?" "She looks like she'd get knocked over by the muzzle blast from her own rifle." A chorus of low chuckles followed. Corporal Miller, wiry and mean, spat a brown stream of tobacco juice near his boot. "Maybe she's here to take notes, Wrecker. Make sure our paperwork's in order." "Paperwork?" Davis scoffed, his eyes tracking the woman's progress. "I'd like to give her some paperwork." Right across the bridge of her nose, the hostility was casual, baked into the culture of this place. They were the tip of the spear, the hardest of the hard. They saw themselves as titans, and this newcomer was an affront to their mythology. She was Navy, for starters. A squid worse. She was a woman whose physical presence didn't scream immediate, overwhelming violence. In their world, that was a critical failure. She passed their position without a glance. Her boots made no sound on the packed earth, a detail that a more observant man might have found unsettling. But these men weren't looking for subtlety. They were looking for confirmation of their own superiority. "Hey, sweetheart!" A younger Marine, PFC Sanchez, called out, emboldened by his sergeant's bravado. "Lost? The galley's that way." The woman didn't break stride. It was as if the sound hadn't registered, as if they were just part of the ambient noise of the base, no more significant than the distant hum of a generator. This complete lack of reaction was more insulting than any retort. It was dismissal. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, the air was stale with the smell of old coffee and nervous sweat. Captain Eva Rostova stood before a wall of monitors displaying grainy drone footage of the surrounding valleys. Her posture was rigid, her dark hair cut in a severe, no-nonsense bob. She was a woman who had fought for every ounce of her authority, and she wore it like armor. She turned as the plywood door creaked open. Petty Officer First Class Anya Sharma stepped inside. She closed the door quietly behind her, the sound a soft click in the tense room. She stood at a perfect, understated parade rest. "Captain Rostova," she said. Her voice was low, devoid of inflection. Rostova's eyes did a quick, brutal assessment. She saw the slight build, the calm face that she mistook for naivety. She saw the Navy insignia and her lips thinned. Politics. This was a political assignment some Joint Operations checkbox SOCOM needed to tick. They'd sent her a token. "Petty Officer Sharma," Rostova replied, her tone clipped and cold. "I read your file. Says you're a special warfare operator. That's a broad term. What, exactly, are we to expect from you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with challenge. It wasn't a request for information. It was a demand for justification. Justify your presence here among real soldiers. Sharma's expression didn't flicker. "I provide operational support and direct action capability as required." Rostova gave a humorless smile. "Direct action. Out here, petty officer, direct action means a 14-hour patrol through hostile territory, carrying 80 pounds of gear, ending in a firefight where the enemy has the high ground. It's not a sterile training exercise on a beach in Coronado. The insult was clear. Sharma was a sailor, a beach creature, out of her depth in the mountains and the mud of the Marine Corps. I'm aware of the operational environment, Captain, Sharma said, her voice remaining perfectly level. The door opened again and Sergeant Davis entered, carrying a radio handset. He stopped short, seeing Sharma. A smirk touched his lips as he waited to see how his captain would handle the interloper. He was her senior enlisted advisor, and their worldview aligned. Competence was measured in grit, muscle, and verifiable combat experience. We have a problem, Rostova continued, turning her back on Sharma to face the map. The asset we're tasked with escorting, codename Sparrow, is spooked. His intelligence has led to 2 successful raids. And now he's convinced the local network has a price on his head. He wants out. Tonight. She tapped a long, winding valley on the map. The exfil point is here at LZ Crow. It's a 7-kilometer patrol through the Usbin Valley. Locals call it the bone grinder we roll out in 2 hours. She finally turned back to Sharma, her arms crossed. You'll remain here. Monitor our comms. Coordinate with the air wing if we need it. Your support will be from the FOB. It was a clear, calculated dismissal. Benched, sidelined, made to watch from the rear like a supply clerk. For the first time, a flicker of something moved in Sharma's dark eyes. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was a cold, quiet intensity. Negative, Captain, she said. The word was soft, yet it landed in the room with the force of a hammer blow. Davis's smirk vanished. He straightened up, his posture shifting from casual arrogance to coiled aggression. No one said negative to Captain Rostova. Rostova's eyes narrowed to slits. Excuse me, petty officer? My orders are to provide close protection for the asset, Sharma stated, her gaze unwavering. That means I am physically attached to him from the point of contact until safe extraction. I go where Sparrow goes. That's not a request. The silence in the TOC was absolute. The hum of the electronics seemed to roar. Rostova stared at Sharma, a battle of wills playing out in the space between them. The captain, a decorated Marine officer in command of a force recon platoon, was being contradicted by a quiet sailor she outweighed by 50 pounds. It was unthinkable. It was insubordination. Yet, there was something in Sharma's stance, in the unblinking stillness of her gaze, that gave Rostova pause. This wasn't the arrogance of a fool. It was the certainty of a professional. There was a deep, unshakable confidence beneath that quiet exterior, and it was more formidable than any amount of bluster. You will be a liability, Sharma, Rostova said, her voice dropping to a low threat. You fall behind, you get in the way, you compromise my Marines, and I will leave you where you stand. Is that clear? Perfectly, Sharma replied. Fine, Rostova spat, turning away. Get your gear, and stay out of the goddamn way. She stabbed a finger at Davis. Sergeant, get her kit out. Make sure she can keep up. Davis nodded, a malicious glint in his eye. Yes, ma'am. He turned to Sharma, his bulk seeming to fill the small room. You heard the captain. Let's go see if you can even lift the gear we carry. His voice was a low growl, a promise of misery to come. Sharma met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. She simply nodded once, then followed him out of the TOC and back into the oppressive, dusty heat, into the heart of the platoon that already despised her. The test had begun. Rostova had dismissed her. Davis had threatened her. The valley was waiting. And Anya Sharma, quiet and unassuming, was exactly where she was supposed to be. She was moving toward the crisis, a place where words and prejudice burned away, leaving only action. The weight of the gear was irrelevant. The disdain of the Marines was noise. The only thing that mattered was the mission and the promise she had made to protect the asset. Promise that was absolute. The 2 hours before the patrol were a slow-burn crucible of contempt. Sergeant Davis made a show of it, dumping a standard Marine ruck, heavy with ammunition, water, batteries, and breaching tools at Sharma's feet. Your pack, petty officer, he said, the title dripping with sarcasm. "Hope you ate your Wheaties." The assembled Marines of 1st Platoon watched, their expressions ranging from amusement to open scorn. The pack was easily 90 pounds. Sharma, standing beside it, looked like a child next to a boulder. She didn't say a word. She knelt, unbuckled the straps of her own smaller pack, and began a methodical transfer. She inspected every piece of gear she was given. She checked the seal on the water bladders, counted the magazines, tested the weight and balance of the breaching shotgun. She moved with a practiced, fluid efficiency that was almost hypnotic. Then she began to discard things. A spare set of NVGs went into a pile. A secondary radio. 3 MREs. She kept the water, the ammo, the medical supplies, and the explosives. Her own pack yielded items the Marines didn't recognize. A compact satellite comms device smaller than a deck of cards, a set of carbon fiber splints, a thin, rolled-up sheet of material that looked like a tarp but felt like silk, and several small, dense packages wrapped in oilcloth. She integrated them into the larger ruck, her movements precise and economical. When she was done, she cinched the straps, stood, and swung the pack onto her shoulders in one smooth motion. She didn't grunt. She didn't stumble. She settled the weight, adjusted the straps, and stood waiting, her posture perfect. The pack looked absurdly large on her, but she wore it as if it were a part of her. Davis's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He'd expected her to complain, to struggle, to prove him right. She had done none of those things. He grunted. "Fine. Let's move." The patrol moved out as the sun bled out behind the western peaks, painting the sky in bruised shades of orange and purple. Captain Rostova took the lead, her rifle held at a low ready. Sergeant Davis was her number 2. The asset, a terrified man named Rahim, whose face was slick with sweat, was placed in the middle of the formation, flanked by 2 burly Marines. Sharma was instructed to take the rear, the traditional spot for the least essential member of the team, the tail end Charlie. The Usbin Valley floor was a treacherous path of loose shale and ankle-turning rocks. The slopes rose up on either side like colossal, jagged walls, pocked with caves and crevices, perfect ambush territory. The air grew cold quickly as darkness fell. The only sounds were the crunch of boots on gravel, the clink of gear, and the ragged, panicked breathing of the asset. Sharma moved with a ghostly silence, while the other Marines, burdened by their armor and heavy tread, sent small cascades of rock skittering down the path. Her steps were measured, placed with a sniper's precision. She wasn't just walking, she was flowing over the terrain. Her head was on a constant, slow swivel, her eyes, now aided by a monocular night vision device, scanning the ridgelines. She wasn't looking at the path in front of her. She was reading the landscape, seeing the dead spaces, the potential firing positions, the lines of sight. An hour into the patrol, Corporal Miller, moving just ahead of her, stumbled, his boot catching on a root. He cursed under his breath. A quiet voice came from behind him. "Watch your step. Ground is disturbed 3 feet ahead. Left side." Miller froze. He swung his own NVGs down, peering at the spot Sharma had indicated. He saw it then. A patch of dirt that was just slightly darker, the texture subtly different. It was a textbook sign of a buried pressure plate. An IED. His blood ran cold. He had been a half step away from turning his squad into a red mist. He looked back at Sharma. She was still scanning the ridgeline, as if her comment had been about the weather. He didn't say thank you. He couldn't. He just gave a curt nod and carefully skirted the area, his heart hammering against his ribs. He passed the word forward up the line. "Watch for ground sign. Talen's got good eyes." The tension in the platoon ratcheted up. They were in the kill box now. The valley narrowed, forcing them into a tight, single-file line. The rock walls felt like they were pressing in, suffocating them. The silence was the worst part. It was a predatory silence, full of unseen watchers. Captain Rostova called a halt. The Marines fanned out, taking what little cover they could find behind scattered boulders. Rostova moved back down the line, her face a grim mask in the green glow of her night vision. "Status?" she whispered to Davis. Tense, ma'am. Miller almost stepped on a dinner plate back there. The Navy girl spotted it. He said it grudgingly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Rostova glanced toward the rear of the formation. Sharma was kneeling, perfectly still, her rifle trained on a dark notch high up on the eastern ridge. She wasn't resting. She was hunting. She's slowing us down? Rostova asked, her voice betraying a hint of hope that her initial assessment would be proven correct. Davis hesitated. No, ma'am. The opposite. She moves like a ghost. Haven't heard a peep out of her. Before Rostova could process this, it happened. It didn't start with a gunshot. It started with a sound like a giant tearing a sheet of canvas, a deafening whump crack that echoed off the canyon walls. An RPG. It slammed into the rock face 20 feet ahead of Rostova, showering the lead elements with razor-sharp shards of stone. PFC Sanchez screamed, a high, thin sound of pain as shrapnel tore into his leg. And then the world exploded into noise and light. Heavy machine gun fire opened up from 3 positions on the ridges, synchronized and devastating. The distinct, high-rate chatter of a PKM from the east, another from the west, and a heavier DSHK from straight ahead, creating an interlocking field of fire. Green tracers sliced through the darkness, kicking up sparks where they hit the rocks. It was a classic L-shaped ambush, perfectly executed. They had been walking into it for the last hour. The platoon's training kicked in. Contact front. Contact east. Contact west. The calls were immediate, but they were drowned out by the thunder of the guns. Marines scrambled for cover, returning fire blindly toward the muzzle flashes. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and hot metal. Rostova, trying to coordinate a defense, felt a searing heat rip through her shoulder. She was thrown back against a rock, her arm going numb. She gritted her teeth, trying to raise her rifle, but the limb wouldn't respond. Her radio operator, trying to get a call out, was stitched across the chest by a burst of PKM fire and collapsed in a heap. Communications were gone. Sergeant Davis was pinned behind a small outcrop of rock, rounds impacting inches above his head, showering him with stone dust. He was screaming orders that no one could hear. Get suppressive fire on that Dishka. Miller, where's the law? But Miller was already down, a round having found the gap between his helmet and his body armor. The asset, Rahim, was shrieking, curled into a fetal position. The disciplined fire of the Marines was devolving into panicked, individual battles for survival. They were pinned. They were being cut to pieces. The plan had evaporated. There was no control. There was only chaos and the deafening, rhythmic hammering of the enemy guns. This was the crisis, the moment where rank and reputation and bravado were stripped away, leaving only instinct and skill. And while the titans of 1st Platoon were being systematically dismantled, the woman they had dismissed was already in motion. While the first RPG turned the front of the column into a hell of shrapnel and confusion, Anya Sharma didn't flinch. She didn't dive for cover. She dropped, not in a panicked fall but in a controlled, fluid motion, going from a kneeling position to a prone one in less than a second. The first volley of machine gun fire that swept the rear of the formation passed harmlessly over her head. The world had dissolved into a green-tinted nightmare of muzzle flashes, tracers, and screaming. For the Marines, it was chaos. For Sharma, it was data. Her mind processed the cacophony with chilling clarity. 3 primary threats: PKM, East Ridge, elevated, firing on the center mass of the platoon. Second PKM, West Ridge, lower, focused on the rear element, cutting off retreat. DSHK, north, head of the valley, chewing up the lead elements and pinning the command group. The RPG was a one-off, designed to initiate and disorient. This was a professional hit. PFC Sanchez's scream cut through the din. Sharma saw him, leg mangled, trying to drag himself behind a rock. He was in the open. The western PKM was walking its fire toward him. Sharma moved. She didn't run. She flowed, keeping her profile so low she was practically crawling. She slithered over the loose rock, her massive pack seeming to add no encumbrance. She moved with the unnerving speed of a predator. She reached Sanchez, grabbed the drag handle on his vest, and pulled. It was a deadlift of over 200 pounds of man and gear, but she hauled him behind cover as if he were a child's toy. "Stay down," she commanded, her voice a low, calm growl that cut through his pain-filled haze. Her hands were already moving, pulling a tourniquet from her own kit. She cinched it high on his thigh, twisting the windlass with brutal efficiency. The bleeding slowed. Sanchez stared at her, his eyes wide with shock and awe. This was the woman he'd catcalled just hours before. She left him there, her focus already back on the fight. The DSHK was the biggest problem. It was tearing them apart. The Marines were returning fire, but their 556mm rounds were just sparking off the rocks around the fortified heavy gun position. They were outranged and outgunned. Sharma crawled to Corporal Miller's still form. She didn't check for a pulse. She could see the wound. It was final. With no ceremony, she unslung his M110 sniper rifle. She gently rolled him over, retrieving 2 spare magazines from his pouches. "Sorry," she whispered to the dead man, a brief, stark acknowledgement. She slid into a firing position behind a narrow wedge of rock, the DSHK's muzzle flash her only point of aim. She didn't use the high-powered scope. In the strobing darkness, it was a liability. She used the iron sights. She settled the rifle into her shoulder, her breathing slowing, her body becoming as still as the stone she hid behind. The world narrowed to the front sight post, the distant flicker of the enemy gun, and her own heartbeat. She didn't wait for a lull. She waited for the gunner's rhythm. Every machine gunner has one, a slight pause in the burst as they shift their aim. Fire, 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 shift. Fire, 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 shift. She saw it. A half-second pause. She exhaled. The rifle cracked, a single, sharp report that was utterly distinct from the chaotic spray of automatic fire. It was a sound of immense precision. High on the northern ridge, the DSHK's thunderous roar abruptly stopped. For a heartbeat, the valley was just a little quieter. Sergeant Davis, still pinned down, noticed it immediately. The crushing weight of the .50 caliber fire was gone. He risked a look over his rock. He saw Sharma, a slim silhouette against the flashes from the other guns, working the bolt on the M110. He watched as she shifted her aim, her movements economical and deadly. Now the Eastern PKM. This one was trickier, dug in behind a rock formation. Sharma fired twice. The first shot was a ranging shot, intentionally striking the rock just below the muzzle flash. The enemy gunner, thinking he was being zeroed in, ducked. That was the mistake. As he ducked, he moved his head into a predictable path. Sharma's second shot was already on its way. The PKM fell silent. 2 heavy weapons down. In less than 30 seconds. The remaining PKM on the west ridge, the one that had been suppressing the rear, suddenly found itself the sole focus of every remaining Marine's rifle. The volume of return fire increased tenfold. The gunner, panicked, fired a long, undisciplined burst before ceasing fire, likely relocating. The ambush wasn't over, but its back was broken. The initiative had shifted, and it was all because of her. Davis watched, mesmerized. This wasn't soldiering as he knew it. This was something else. It was surgical. It was lethal. He had seen Force Recon snipers, MARSOC operators. None of them moved like this. None of them processed a firefight with this terrifying calm. Sharma wasn't done. She dropped the sniper rifle, picked up her own carbine, and began moving forward. She moved through the kill zone as if it were a training ground, from one piece of cover to the next. She reached Rostova, who was propped against a rock, trying to direct the remaining men with one arm, her face pale. "Captain," Sharma said, her voice still calm. She knelt, her eyes scanning Rostova's wound. "Entry here. No exit. It's in there." Her hands went to her medical kit. She worked quickly, packing the wound with combat gauze, her movements sure and practiced. Rostova stared at her, dazed by pain and disbelief. "The guns. How?" "They're suppressed," Sharma said. Not looking up from her work, she wrapped a pressure dressing around the captain's shoulder. But not for long. Their support elements will be moving to flank us. Davis scrambled over to them, his rifle held tight, his earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by a raw, naked confusion. "Who the hell are you?" he breathed, the question an accusation and a plea. He had just watched this woman, this secretary, single-handedly dismantle a perfectly laid ambush that should have wiped them all out. Sharma finished securing the dressing on Rostova's shoulder. She looked from the wounded captain to the stunned sergeant. Her gaze was flat, her face illuminated in the eerie green glow of the night. It was on her forearm, partially visible where her sleeve was pushed up from treating the captain, that Rostova saw it. A small, faded tattoo, barely discernible in the dark. A bird of prey, its wings spread, clutching an anchor in one talon and a trident in the other. Rostova's breath hitched. She'd seen that insignia before in classified briefings in the company of legends. The eagle, anchor, and trident. "What team?" Rostova whispered, her voice barely audible over the sporadic rifle fire that still echoed through the valley. The question was packed with meaning. It wasn't just a query. It was an acknowledgement of a different world, a higher echelon of warfare she had only ever heard stories about. Sharma didn't answer. She ignored the question, her focus absolute. The immediate threat was handled, but the crisis was far from over. They were trapped, wounded, with no communications, and a determined enemy regrouping in the darkness. The surviving Marines had formed a tight perimeter, their confidence shattered, looking for leadership that had, until moments ago, been absent. She pulled the compact satellite device from a pouch on her vest. It was matte black with no markings, unlike their bulky PRC 117s. She flipped a small antenna up and shielded the glowing screen with her body. Her fingers moved over the keypad with practiced speed. Davis, still reeling, watched her. "What is that?" "That's not standard issue." Sharma glanced at him, her eyes cold steel. For the first time, she addressed him directly, not as a sergeant, not as a Marine, but as a piece on the board. "Get your men ready. Consolidate ammo. Set up interlocking fields of fire. We'll have birds in the air in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Davis balked. "We can't even get a signal out. The canyon walls." "I have a signal." She cut him off, her voice leaving no room for argument. She put the device to her ear. The fear and awe on Davis's face curdled into pure shock as he heard her speak. Her cadence was different now. The quiet, unassuming woman was gone. This was someone else entirely. "Nix to Oracle. Over." The name was alien. A call sign. A crackle of static, then a clear voice from the device. "Oracle copies. Go, Nix." "Firebird is down," Sharma said, her voice clipped, all business. Firebird was the platoon's call sign. She knew their call sign. "Asset is secure but compromised. We are in the Usbin kill box. Grid reference 42, Sierra, Echo Papa, 719-541. Engaged by a platoon-sized element, multiple heavy weapons. Ambush suppressed, but we are fixed. Requesting immediate CAS for danger close fire mission, followed by emergency exfil for entire element." "How copy?" Oracle. The platoon's comm specialist, a young lance corporal whose radio was a useless brick, had crawled closer. His eyes went wide. "Nix, Oracle." The call signs weren't in the Marine Corps lexicon. They belonged to a different, more shadowy playbook. Oracle was a name whispered in intel circles. It was the command and control node for Naval Special Warfare Development Group. DevGru. "Solid copy, Nix." The voice on the sat phone replied. "Assets are spinning up. Spectre is 5 mics out. Lay down IR strobes on your position. We'll walk the guns in on the ridgelines. Stand by for exfil coordination. Nix copies. Out." Sharma lowered the device. The silence that followed was more profound than the noise of the firefight. The remaining Marines stared at her. The comm specialist was pale. He looked at Davis. "Sergeant," the specialist stammered. Oracle. That's SEAL Team 6-inch. The words dropped into the small circle of shattered Marines like a grenade. Not just a SEAL. The elite of the elite. The quiet woman they had mocked, the Secretary Wrecker had wanted to assault, was a Tier 1 operator. A ghost. The mythology was real, and she was standing right in front of them. Captain Rostova, propped up against the rock, looked from the fading trident tattoo on Sharma's arm to her face. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The quiet confidence, the impossible calm under fire, the lethal surgical precision, the advanced gear, the call sign, Nyx, the Greek goddess of the night, the fit. She wasn't a liaison. She wasn't support. She was the primary instrument. The entire mission, the Marine escort, they were just the cover story, the outer layer of protection for the real operator. She hadn't been attached to them. They had been attached to her. Davis felt a wave of cold shame wash over him, so potent it was nauseating. His earlier words, his sneering contempt, his threat. He looked at the woman who had just saved all their lives, who had moved with a grace and lethality he couldn't comprehend. He had wanted to break her nose. The thought was so absurd, so hideously ignorant, that he felt his stomach clench. He had been a loud, posturing child in the presence of a master. Sharma paid their stunned silence no mind. The reveal meant nothing to her. It was simply a consequence of the mission's evolution. She was already back to work. "Strobes," she ordered, her voice sharp, pulling them from their stupor. "Now. Perimeter, 360 degrees. Mark our position. Davis, get the asset ready to move. You too," she pointed to 2 other Marines. "Prep the wounded for transport. Captain Rostova goes first." Her commands were not suggestions. They were facts. The entire command structure had inverted in the space of 5 minutes. Rostova was a casualty. Davis was a subordinate. Sharma was in command. And no one, not for a single second, questioned it. The change in the platoon was instantaneous and absolute. The remaining Marines, who had been teetering on the edge of panic, now moved with a renewed, desperate purpose. But their movements were different. They didn't just obey Sharma's orders. They anticipated them. They looked to her for every cue, their eyes constantly flicking toward her, seeking guidance, validation. The casual arrogance of the Force Recon platoon had been sandblasted away, leaving behind the raw, humbled core of professional soldiers in the presence of undeniable mastery. Sergeant Davis, Wrecker, was the most transformed. The swagger was gone. The sneer was gone. He moved with a quiet, focused intensity, his eyes downcast, his shame a palpable aura. When Sharma issued a command, he simply replied with a clipped, "Yes, ma'am," a title of respect he would have choked on just hours earlier. He organized the ammunition consolidation with brutal efficiency, his hands checking magazines and redistributing them, his mind clearly racing to catch up, to prove himself worthy of breathing the same air as her. Sharma directed the defense not with shouts, but with a series of precise hand signals and low, terse commands. She had them reposition, shifting their small perimeter to cover the most likely avenues of approach. She pointed out firing lanes they had missed, weaknesses in their own cover. She saw the battlefield in 3 dimensions, a geometric puzzle of angles and depth that was invisible to them until she pointed it out. A low, guttural rumble began to build, vibrating through the rock beneath them. It was a sound that was both terrifying and beautiful. An AC-130 Spectre gunship. "IR strobes on," Sharma commanded. The Marines activated their infrared markers, and the small pocket of the valley floor lit up in the invisible spectrum. Seconds later, a voice, inhuman and filtered, crackled over Sharma's device. "Oracle relays, Spectre 1 is on station. We have your strobes. We see you, Nyx. Where do you want the rain?" Sharma lay prone, looking through Miller's M110 scope, now using its thermal setting. The ridgelines, once dark, were now dotted with the heat signatures of the enemy fighters, regrouping for another assault. "Oracle, this is Nyx," she said, her voice a surgeon's calm. "Target Package 1, Eastern Ridge, from grid 721 to 542, extending north for 200 meters. Danger close. Authorize 40 millimeter. Copy, danger close. Cleared hot. A moment of impossible silence. And then the sky ripped open. A sound like a buzzsaw the size of a mountain tore through the air as the Spectre's Bofors cannon spoke. The eastern ridge erupted in a series of violent, percussive explosions. The ground shook. The flashes of the impacts illuminated the valley in stark, strobing white light, revealing glimpses of bodies being thrown through the air. Davis and his men pressed themselves flat, tucking their heads. They had called in airstrikes before, but never like this. Never this close, this precise, this overwhelmingly violent. This wasn't just fire support. It was annihilation on demand. Shift fire, Sharma said into the calm, her voice completely unaffected by the maelstrom she had just unleashed. Target package 2, Western Ridge. Saturation with 25 millimeter. Work your way down the line. The gunship complied. The Western Ridge was systematically erased from existence by the Gatling gun's furious barrage. The surviving enemy fighters, caught between the two fires, broke. Their heat signatures scattered, fleeing back into the mountains. The immediate threat was gone. In the ringing silence that followed, another sound grew. The percussive whump-whump-whump of inbound helicopters. 2 Black Hawks, flying low and fast, their navigation lights off. LZ is the valley floor, right on our position, Sharma directed. 1 bird for casualties and the asset, 2nd for the rest of the element. Move. Now. The platoon scrambled. Davis and another Marine carefully lifted Captain Rostova onto a collapsible litter. As they carried her toward the landing zone, Rostova's eyes were fixed on Sharma. The captain was a proud woman, a leader who had clawed her way to the top of a brutal profession. In her eyes, there was no resentment, no anger at being superseded. There was only a deep, profound, and wordless respect. As they passed Sharma, who was providing overwatch with the sniper rifle, Rostova gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a concession of authority from one commander to another. The first Black Hawk touched down in a whirlwind of dust and rotor wash. The wounded, including Sanchez, and the terrified asset were loaded aboard with swift efficiency. As the first bird lifted off, the second settled. Davis held back, gesturing for his remaining men to get on. He was the last to board, but before he stepped up, he turned to Sharma. She was still kneeling, scanning the dark ridges, ensuring no last-ditch effort from the enemy would endanger the extraction. "Sharma!" he yelled over the noise of the rotors. "Get on!" She gave one last sweep of the area, then slung the sniper rifle and sprinted for the helicopter, her movements still impossibly light despite the heavy pack. She vaulted into the cabin and took a knee by the door, her rifle pointed out into the darkness, covering their departure. She was the last one on, the first one to resume a fighting posture. As the Black Hawk climbed, banking sharply away from the Valley of Death, the Marines inside were silent. They looked at their own wounded. They looked at the empty spaces where Miller and the other fallen had been. And they looked at Anya Sharma. She was a small woman, kneeling by the open door, the wind whipping at her, her form a compact knot of coiled lethality. She hadn't boasted. She hadn't gloated. She hadn't even acknowledged their shift in attitude. She had simply done her job. She had descended into their hell, taken control, and led them out of it. Sergeant Cole Wrecker Davis sat strapped into his seat, his hands resting on his rifle. He couldn't take his eyes off her. The image of her firing the sniper rifle, the utter calm as she called in the gunship, the cold authority in her voice, it was all burned into his mind. He was a Force Recon Marine, a man who defined his worth by his toughness, his aggression, his place at the top of the infantry food chain. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was not even in the same league as the woman kneeling 5 feet away from him. He was a blunt instrument. She was a scalpel. He was a soldier. She was a weapon. The respect he felt was so total it bordered on fear. It was the awe of a mortal who had just witnessed a god of war at work. They landed at a larger, more fortified airbase hours later. The wounded were rushed to the field hospital. The dead were carried with grim reverence to the morgue. The survivors of 1st Platoon were herded into a debriefing room, but Sharma was separated from them, disappearing with 2 quiet men in sterile civilian clothes who seemed to have been waiting for her. The official report would be simple. 1st Platoon was ambushed. They suffered casualties but repelled the attack with the assistance of air support and successfully extracted the asset. Petty Officer Sharma's name would be mentioned only in a classified annex, her actions sanitized into bland jargon. Her legend would not be written in official histories, but in the hushed, awestruck whispers of the men who survived because of her. 2 days later, Sergeant Davis was released from medical observation, cleared of concussion. The platoon was on stand-down, confined to a quiet section of the base to recover. The atmosphere among them was somber, changed. The loud jokes and crude posturing were gone, replaced by a quiet introspection. They had faced the abyss and been pulled back by an unlikely savior. Davis found himself walking, his feet carrying him without conscious thought. He ended up outside a small, featureless containerized housing unit, the kind assigned to transient personnel. He knew it was hers. He could feel it. He stood there for a long time, the desert sun beating down on him. What could he say? Sorry, I was an arrogant fool who underestimated you. Thank you for not letting us all die. The words felt cheap, inadequate. He went to the mess hall, a place he usually avoided, and got 2 mugs of the thick, strong coffee the cooks brewed for the night cruise. He walked back to her CHU. He could hear a soft, rhythmic sound from inside. Click-clack, scrape, click. He knocked softly. The sound stopped. The door opened a few inches. Anya Sharma stood there. She was in a simple gray t-shirt and fatigue pants. Her hair was down, falling to her shoulders. Without the armor and the helmet, she looked even smaller. But her eyes were the same, dark, steady, and ancient. They held no judgment, no accusation. They just waited. Davis couldn't find his voice. He felt like a clumsy giant, a loud, stupid animal. The man who had earned the name Wrecker for his destructive force in combat felt utterly powerless. He held out one of the mugs. Coffee, he mumbled, his voice thick. Sharma looked at the mug, then back at his face. She saw the shame in his eyes, the profound, unspoken apology. She saw the hard-won respect. She gave a barely perceptible nod, her expression softening by an infinitesimal degree. She took the mug from him. Her fingers brushed his, and he felt an unexpected jolt, not of electricity, but of immense, contained power. Thank you, Sergeant, she said. Her voice was quiet again, the voice of Anya Sharma, not the voice of Nix. Davis just nodded, unable to speak. He felt a lump form in his throat. He cleared it, turned, and walked away without looking back. There was nothing more to say. The gesture had said it all. Sharma closed the door. In the center of the small, Spartan room, the parts of her carbine were laid out on a clean cloth. She had been meticulously cleaning it, a ritual of purification and focus. She placed the mug of coffee on the small metal table beside her work. The steam rose from it in a slow, curling spiral, briefly catching the light from the single window. She sat down and picked up the rifle's bolt carrier group, her fingers resuming their methodical, practiced cleaning. The coffee was a peace offering, an admission, a salute. It was the quietest, most meaningful apology a man like Davis was capable of. She had not asked for his respect, and she did not need it, but it had been offered and she had accepted. Outside, the sun began to set, casting long, stark shadows across the base. The day was ending. Her work here was done. She would be gone by morning, a ghost moving on to the next crisis, the next place where the quiet professional was needed. She took a slow sip of the coffee. It was hot, black, and strong. It tasted of respect, earned in the crucible of the bone grinder, paid for in blood, and delivered in silence.